The video on rebalancing that explains the math behind it is perfectly sufficient for the test. I'm not going to give you a problem on the test that's as complicated as what I'm about to show you. But what I am about to show you is very much the way things work or can work in real life. And so, what I just want to show you is how when you open a mutual fund account, one of the things that you can choose to do is tell the mutual fund company that when they pay dividends, you want those dividends automatically reinvested in more shares of the fund. Or you can opt to just receive those dividends in cash. And so, as an example, I'm using the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Investors Fund. That's one of the funds that's in my daughter's portfolios. And normally they would have a big blue line on this graph that would show the prices at different points in time. But for whatever reason, that's not displaying. I don't actually need that right now. What I need are these little dividend diamonds down here in blue. They tell me what dividend the fund paid and the day that they paid it. And then what I'm going to assume is that, and this isn't really how the day that I purchased this fund for my daughters, but I'm going to assume for this demonstration that we bought the fund on January the 2nd, the first day that the market was open, or, we had January the 1st is a holiday, so they were closed that day and you couldn't buy shares that day. And if you look up here, and it's in light gray, I don't know if you can actually see it very well, but as I move my cursor to different days, it tells me the price of the fund on that day. So on January the 2nd, I can see that it was trading at $51.55. Then they paid a dividend on March the 24th of 23.2 cents per share. So how much you actually received in total dollars depends on how many shares you own. And I can also see in the upper right corner of that graph that on that day, the fund was trading for $53.50. They paid another dividend in June on the 25th of 21.4 cents per share, and the fund was trading at $53.07 that day. And then one more dividend on the 24th of September. And so I have just tallied that information right here. So I'm tracking the exact days that they paid a dividend, how much that dividend was per share, and how much the fund cost or the price of that fund on those specific days. And then I'm also tracking the price on the 2nd of January because I'm assuming that's when I purchased the shares. And I'm also assuming that I invested $4,760. And that's kind of a weird number, but that's actually how much I put in the fund, this particular fund for my daughters. So I want to show you what happens as we go through the year, because what I told the fund to do was to automatically reinvest any dividends into more shares of the fund. So even though I've not added any more money to this account and my daughters haven't added any more money, it has grown in value. Well, the number of shares have risen, has risen. So the first thing I need to figure out is how many shares were purchased. And you can, well, I'm just going to create links here in my spreadsheet so the spreadsheet will do the math for me fairly quickly. I invested $4,760 in that fund, and at the very day that the shares were purchased, we're assuming the fund was trading at, or not trading, that's the wrong word, was selling for $51.55 a share. That means that she bought 92.34 shares of the fund on January the 2nd. That is going to impact the dollar dividends that she would get if she received them as dividends. So here, I'm now going to say, well, all right, on March the 24th, they paid dividends of 23.2 cents a share, but she owned 92.33 shares. So she would have gotten dividends of $21.42 if she had elected to just have that cash put into her account. But she didn't. She instead said, take that money, the $21.42, and use it to buy some shares of the fund. By that day, the fund was trading a little, well, it cost a little bit more. It cost $52.78 instead of $51.55. So since she was only going to get $21.42 in dividends, she couldn't afford an entire share. How much could she afford? What fraction of a share could she afford? I'd take that 21.42 and divide it by the price of the fund at on that day, 52.78. So she could buy 0.41 shares. So over here I'm going to tally the total number of shares owned. So she started out with 92. I'm just gonna I'll just pop that over. There's no real need to, but I will. And then she still had the 92.34 she originally purchased, but now she's going to add 0.405 more shares to that, so she's up to 92.74. And I'm going to go ahead and work these out individually. I could just copy my equations up, but I'm not going to. So now in June of 2015, the fund paid another dividend of 21.4 cents a share. So I'm going to link that. She doesn't own 92.33 shares anymore. She owns 92.74 shares. So she's going to get the 21 cents times the 92.74. That's how much they would have paid her. Now you notice the dividend dropped, not because the number of shares fell, but because the per share dividend fell. They didn't pay quite as much in June as they paid in March. The total number of shares she could afford to purchase with that $19.85 would be that dividend dollar amount divided by the price of the fund on that day. And the price of the fund has risen, plus the dollar dividends has dropped, so she's not going to be able to afford quite as much as she could afford the previous time they paid a dividend. Now, take how many shares she owned previously, the 92.74, and add to that the fraction of a share that she just bought by reinvesting her dividend, and now she owns 93.12 shares. Do that one last time. In September, take the 23.3 cents per share times the number of shares that she owns to get the dollar dividend that she is entitled to. Take that dollar dividend, divide it by the price per share of the fund on the day the dividend was received, and that's how many shares she can afford to purchase or reinvest with her dividends. And then take the previous number of shares that she owned and add to it the fraction of a share that she just bought. And what will also happen is presumably in December the fund will pay a dividend. We just haven't gotten to December 2015 yet. And so this would happen one more time this year. So you can see the number of shares that she owns is rising because she's reinvesting those dividends. That's going to change. It's going to impact the weight that that fund has in her portfolio. So it's not only the price changes that impact the weight of a fund in your portfolio, it's also the dividends if you opt to reinvest them that will impact it as well.